So we've got Andrew Cust here on having a sip. Andrew Cust, our stable vet from the Ballarat vet practice. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
So first and foremost, obviously being an equine vet and specialising in the racing industry, how did you become interested in racing?
Look, it's a long story. Dad's a horse vet. Dad's a racing vet. Still works for RVL. So all my childhood, I was brought up around racehorses and veterinary work on racehorses. And Mum and Dad raced a few when I was younger too. And a lot of those horses went on and were retired to the farm, and we rode them as kids. So I sort of got in it in a roundabout way from a lot of different directions.
Very good. And so a regular week for you, obviously a young family, and anything to do with the horses is very time consuming and time demanding. What does a regular week look like for you?
A regular week is really simply sort of morning is stable work and afternoon are workups and out in the field, checking horses at spelling farms, castrations and those sort of less urgent things in the afternoon.
And what about the roster? How does that work with you guys as far as days on, days off, and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, look, we try to roster it evenly throughout our hospital. We have a hospital attached to the ambulatory and stable work, so we have horses coming in all night and all day, and so we do our fair share of nighttime calls. So an average day would be somewhere between 7 and 8 in the morning to about 6 or 7 at night, and then we usually share the after hours roster in the hospital and accept colics and emergency surgeries and that sort of thing, and then we share the weekends out as well.
Now, and then at this time of year, you do a bit with the quarantine horses coming in from overseas for the spring races. So what do you get up to down there?
Well, that's a really interesting part of my job. I'm lucky enough to look after the OTI horses in quarantine, and they basically arrive from Europe each year, and we look after them. We do the quarantine requirements, which is the nasal swabs and scanning them for exotic diseases. And we also do the Racing Victoria work on them in that we prepare them for the races that they're targeting. And the biggest sort of the most critical point, I guess, is that first 24, 48 hours after arriving from Europe, because the flight can take potentially over 40 hours. So these horses can be a little flat when they arrive. So we really enjoy, I really enjoy going down there and looking after those horses.
So when they first arrive, what are you on the lookout for? And what are the checks and whatever else you're doing to make sure they've travelled safely and settled in well?
It's actually really similar to humans with the long haul flights. You can get off a flight, a long haul flight, and if you've had a bad flight, you can be pretty dusty, even if you haven't had a drink on the flight. So these horses, we're looking at their weight loss during the flight. We're looking at their demeanour, and we take bloods from them, looking for potential infections that they've picked up. And most of all, we're looking at dehydration. We don't want the result of dehydration during the flight. We don't want that resulting in, an impaction colic or something like that, because we only have 2 weeks basically from the time they arrive usually till their first race.
Very good. It's certainly come a long way from the times where you see Farlap being craned onto the airplanes, but they've sort of got it down to a fine art, especially those bigger stables. What about as far as major wins on the racetrack that you've been involved in any highlights there?
Yeah, there's plenty of highlights. I've been working with you for a long time, and we've had a fair few highlights ourselves together. But I guess one out of the box was Prince of Penzance. Funny story there. I was actually looking after the favourite in quarantine called Fame Game, I think, that year, and I went down to the races. I don't go down that often, and looking after Fame Game, and my wife had a bet on Prince of Penzance, and I couldn't believe it, because we're not a punting family, but I couldn't believe that she'd put her money on Prince of Penzance, and then to see him win was a great thrill. But there's been plenty. That was a surprise, but there's been some really hard-earned wins through the maintenance of a horse that needs a lot of help, and the training. Horses like Dandino, Galo Chop, I've looked after, and their stacks. We nearly beat Winks with Humidor. So there's been lots of those. And then every now and then I get a text message or a phone call from someone who's one at Manangatang that's had a tendon injury that we've rehabbed or something, and I just get an enormous thrill out of those sort of wins.
So just briefly, why was Prince of Penzance such a big deal? I mean, I know a little bit of the background story behind it, but as far as, you know, he had a fair few issues along the way, and certainly veterinary issues that you dealt with. So just maybe if you can, without breaching confidentiality, what sort of issues that he had and what he went through.
Yeah, look, I think it's pretty public with all the stories and the books and everything and the movie. But basically, he was recovering from an arthroscopy at a spelling farm when he got colic, and luckily it was close to Ballarat at Laura Dixon's property, and she noticed that, and the horse was rushed into the hospital, and it had full colic surgery, and recovered well, and came back and still was a really good racehorse. And so we were just thrilled that it got back to the track and ran so well. And then when it got in the cup, we're all very excited, but I don't think our expectations were that high at 100-1. And so we just got a lot of self-satisfaction out of the whole process. And it's good. We still enjoy it, the thought of it.
And that colic surgery involved removing some of his guts or
No, it didn't. So we could talk about this for hours, but there's quite a big difference between untwisting it, so to speak, or replacing it in the right spot and taking out ingesta that's blocking it. There's quite a bit of difference between that and removing segments of gut in their recovery and their prognosis. And no, we're lucky enough. We had him on the table, I think, within an hour and a half of him starting to colic. And there was no devitalized gut. And so he really just needed the twist untwisted. So basically take all the guts out, untwist it all, and then stuff it all back in. And then any blockages of ingesta that had caused were removed by just putting a hole in it rather than cutting a segment out.
Yeah, by any means, it's a massive surgery, and certainly a very tough horse to come back and do that. From your angle, what can our industry do to improve going forward? Obviously, we've had some owners and bloodstock agents and that sort of stuff, but from a veterinary point of view, and be honest, we need to be a little bit honest and brutally honest about our industry sometimes for people to realise that we do care about the animals. What do you think that we can do to improve?
Well, there's a number of things. I think and RVL are actually putting a lot of resources into this and asking a lot of questions of trainers and racing vets. And I think it's heading in the right direction. But the two things that I think are potentially really important is, one, as a vet, when you go and see a horse that may not be going as well as it could be, you don't really find out how many missed training days they have. So it's all very well to see a horse on face value for its lameness and investigate that lameness. But I think when it comes to major injuries, I think there may be a link to the horse not having having missed training days. And I think if a horse is not conditioned enough to race in the race that it's racing in, then I think that increases the chance of catastrophic injury, but career-ending injuries. So I think that's really important. So the workload that it's getting, because any horse can swim and maybe just do some work on the treadmill and make it to the races, but are they really conditioned for the run that they're about to have? And this may be also an argument that they're having, or a debate they're having with the European horses. Are they conditioned to come here and race twice in 3 weeks or twice in 4 weeks to try and get into the Melbourne Cup? There may be some sort of link between those two arguments. And then the second thing is, I think we're light on in the racing world in the recovery of horses from races. You watch all these footballers and netballers doing all their recoveries and ice baths and all this sort of stuff after they've played, and even after they've trained on their hard training days. And, we do very little in the big scheme of things. Some horses get ice, some horses get anti-inflammatories, but I think there's a lot more we could do to check these horses out post-race, recover them properly, and find maybe little issues then, rather than when we're about to run them again.
Very interesting. It's certainly a topic of debate every spring when the internationals come out and some fall by the wayside in quarantine. I know it's a hard time of year and everyone's sort of pushing and trying to get the horses in best possible nick for race day, but they're coming off what we're not coming off is we're conditioning into the races, and they're probably coming off the back of a long season and trying to break up their training with travel and then race again. So it's certainly something that I think RVL are working hard on, and something that will change in the future. Just getting back to our stable, how did you become involved with us?
With Mitch Freedman racing?
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a long story, actually. there was a young fella working down in Warrnambool sometime, and I went down to have a look at some horses, and I met you, and we had a crazy spring with Puissance Saloon, and that was sort of my first real, I guess, introduction with you into enormous scrutiny, training a horse in Australia with enormous scrutiny from the press, from the jockeys, from everybody around us. And that's how I met you. And then you've gone on and got your own license, and I was visiting you down in Warrnambool, and then you've, to my excitement, you've moved to Ballarat. It's made it a lot closer and next door. And so we've continued the relationship.
Yeah, so it's a pretty solid relationship we've got. We're probably in here, 5 or 6 days a week, and certainly know a lot of our horses well. And it's it is really good to have that relationship with you and the Ballarat Vet Practice.
Yeah.
We get to the standard questions that happen in every one of these chats, and the first one is: do you prefer a front runner or a back marker?
I like a back marker.
And do you call it a Palmer or a Palmy?
Palmer.
And the tomato sauce, does it live in the cupboard or in the fridge?
No, always in the cupboard.
Very good. You've passed with flying colours on those 3 questions, and we've really appreciated you giving us some of your time and joining us for the chat today. And thank you very much. And we will continue this good relationship, and hopefully all our contacts and owners get a good thrill out of this chat.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mitch. It's been a pleasure to come on your show, and good luck for the rest of the spring.